Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our very first Church Tech Chat. Try saying that after you've had a KFC. A Church Tech Chat lunchtime webinar. And this week, it's So You Want to Live Stream. And what we're planning to do is, for 6 sessions, look at some of the different aspects of live streaming, different aspects of broadcasting, why we might do it, and why it might help us serve the mission of God within our communities. So you are very welcome to join us today, whether you're on Facebook. Unfortunately, YouTube has let us down. I know the big people at Google have not activated our streaming today. It will be there next week. I will put it up as a recording after the broadcast. But hopefully you're on Facebook. If you are, you can drop us some comments in the comments box, ask some questions, and then we will be able to interact and answer some of them, hopefully. I want to introduce you to the team. I'm Brian. I'm a parish minister in the Church of Scotland in Lanark, in the Royal Borough of Lanark, and I'm the presbytery clerk for the presbytery here. And I've been interested in live streaming and been doing it for the last 10 years or so. And I'll introduce you to our next colleague, who's Jeremy, and I'll let Jeremy explain who he is.
Hi, yes, I'm Jeremy. I'm from south of the border. I'm a village vicar at the moment in Suffolk, soon moving to Oxfordshire, so moving from east of London to west of London. And I'm also involved in Faith Online, which is a streaming service, and in thischurch.uk, which helps churches get Cheapest Chips website. So thanks, Brian.
Cheapest Chips websites, that's always good, always good. And the third member of our team is somebody that might be known to some of you from Sanctus Media, based in Bo'ness here in Scotland, is Neil McLennan. Good afternoon, Neil.
Good afternoon, Brian. It's good to see you. You've had an adventurous day today already.
I have. I've had my second jag. Sorry. This is a north-south divide. We're a jag. Jeremy, you guys get jabs, don't you?
We do.
Yeah, see, so if you're watching in Scotland, yes, Neil, today I've had my second jag. And for those in England, yes, Jeremy, today I've had my second jab.
Thanks for the translation.
And no worries. And don't worry, everyone. I know you're worried about me. You're anxious. I do accept all prayers, but I'm okay just now. It was an hour and a half ago, so if my arm suddenly falls off, oh no, I better not say that. Facebook will put a big strike on us for anti-COVID information. But yes, it has been a big day. But what was even bigger, Neil, was I did go for a KFC afterwards because I knew leading a webinar on an empty stomach is not a good thing. It's
important to keep those blood sugar levels high for these stressful events.
I'm not turning my camera down to my desk about there, which shows just where my blood sugar levels goes. So yes, and if Mike Gostares call me two jags again, then I'll be seeing him later on. It really is great to be here and to see folks from around the country joining in and perhaps showing an interest in this Church Tech Chat. And we felt it was important after a webinar we did about 6 weeks ago to do something more. So this is not just one conversation, but it's 6 conversations around live streaming. It's not just for ministers. It's not just for worship leaders. It's really for anyone who wants to think about what it means to live stream and to broadcast and the difference that might make to our mission in church. So, Jeremy, a little bit about your experience of live streaming. Where have you come from in all this journey?
Well, I guess I started, like a lot of people did, with just sheer panic. so my first week, I kind of Googled, how do you do this? Fortunately, I had already set up, I think, a YouTube channel and Facebook, because it wasn't off the agenda. It just didn't seem like a big priority. So I think I stumbled my way into live streaming and just kept asking people questions. What are you doing? How are you doing it? So I guess I'm definitely here not as an expert who says I've seen the future. Here is exactly how it is, but as someone who's gone through all of those sort of stumble through a week at a time, and then gradually work out how to do it, and so on. So the topic I'm picking up today is one where definitely I'm learning as I'm going along, and I think we'll learn again thinking about who are we streaming for, and what are we doing is. That definitely is, in a time of transition now, very important.
Yeah. And what about you, Neil? What's your background in all this?
Well, I've been live streaming for a little bit. I think probably, I certainly have recollections of doing General Assembly stuff back in 2006, which seems like a lifetime away. And my local parish church, St Andrews in Bowness, we've been streaming for at least 10, 15 years. Before COVID, and we might talk about the difference pre-COVID and COVID live streaming throughout our episodes. But ever since live streaming was a postage stamp, right through to full HD or even 4K, I suppose, if you've got the bandwidth to cope with that. But I've been part of many churches' journeys along the years, and have seen, firsthand what are the challenges and what are the opportunities that churches have tackled with, but also grasped. As they've engaged in the live streaming journey. And I hope to touch on some of those kind of real life tales too over the next 6 episodes.
Yeah, and as a practitioner, as a worship leader, as a minister, I've been really, my role in live streaming is to stand up and I would love to say be the face, but that might put a lot of people off our live stream. But it really has been to lead worship and try and push and encourage some of our folks in the church to see what's possible and expand those horizons. And everything that we've done has come from a few folks when I've gone and said, I was thinking, do you think we could? And suddenly it's built and it's there. So I think there are lots of opportunities there, and I think as we move back, and Mike's just made a really valid point that we might touch on later on about whether we keep live streaming from the manse or do we live stream for the church, or what does that work? And I've been thinking a lot about that, Mike. So thinking a little bit about intentionality and thinking about where it is that people are watching from, how we are producing things. All these things are really important, and hopefully we'll come on to that later on. We also are really grateful to be joined by David Styler, and I'll just bring David in just now to introduce himself. David is one of the lawyers in the law department of the Church of Scotland and has been involved in data protection, GDPR, and all those things. And David's hopefully going to give us some helpful advice later on. So good afternoon, David. It's nice to see you.
Good afternoon. Yes, good to see you. Yeah, I'll do my best to keep people, from falling asleep, if nothing else, going through the joys of data protection and GDPR and other points to consider when approaching live streaming. So I won't go into any great detail on the basis that GDPR is such a minefield and we can get sidetracked so very easily. But I think it might be helpful for me to provide a general overview. And if questions emerge from that, then perhaps those can be addressed in more detail as these sessions progress.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. We look forward to hearing from you later on. Thank you for just now. We've just had one question there, Jeremy, that you might want to answer from our good friend Donald McCorkindale, who's saying it can't display the video. It appears to be on the YouTube channel. Jeremy, have you anything to say about that?
Oh, no. Nothing at all.
Okay.
I will disappear for a minute and have a quick look and see if. But YouTube isn't. Unfortunately, we're not live streaming with YouTube yet. But Facebook should be getting it. I will just disappear for a moment and see.
Yes, I think it is. I think it is on Facebook. Don't worry, it is. It is there. But I think it's just the YouTube. Yeah, YouTube. Yeah. The bad people at Google didn't activate our account in time to live stream, unfortunately. But next week, Donald McCorkindale, I promise, you can see us all in glorious 50-inch HD while you eat your lunch. I don't know what could be better than that. It's a deal. But we're going to start today with thinking a little bit about the idea of live streaming and thinking about what we want to live stream, why we want to live stream, and who might be able to do that. So firstly, why live stream? Why do we need to? Because after all, in the church, we've been doing things quite well for the last 2,000 years. Sunday up the front, everyone gathers, and away we go. It's a Sunday morning thing. It's perhaps one of the easiest things that we do, as well as one of the most challenging as ministers. We know how to do it as worship leaders. We know how to stand up and lead worship. Why then do we want to put ourselves through this and go for live streaming as well? There are two sides to that. We've got the post-COVID and we've got pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, in my own congregation, we put a camera on and broadcast our service, and it meant that people who were ill or who couldn't make church because of work or family commitments could join us. Now I'm not so sure about this. I'm not so sure about whether that's enough anymore, to have people kind of watching on for something that's not really created for them, looking on from the bystands at something that's happening for other people and not really feeling a part. So why do we want to live stream? Well, part of the church's story has always been about just that, story, about sharing story, about sharing and telling that story of God. We've looked at different ways to do that throughout the centuries. If you think about why we have stained glass windows in our churches, stained glass windows were there predominantly so that those who weren't able to read, which remember were most people out with the kind of ruling classes or priests at the time, they would still be able to enter into that story of God. They would be able to see and experience and imagine what that story was for them. Is it any different now? When the printing press was invented, it revolutionised how we told stories in church. People could carry their story with them, not just written in their hearts, but all the bits they didn't understand or couldn't remember were there as well. We changed. What about when we decided to tell our story through song and through music? And when we had the fights through our churches about whether we should install these beastly things called pipe organs that just allowed the devil to enter the church one note at a time. Now, try and get rid of a pipe organ, well, that's a whole other story. The way that we've told story has changed and altered over the years. Live streaming is another tool in our armoury to tell the story of God and to bring people into a conversation about God. It's about allowing people to experience the love of God in a community that they might be a part of and unable to attend, or they might never be a physical part of that community. So how do we share that? Why do we want to share what we need to do and what we need to speak of and how we worship? There is another aspect to this as well. We might understand why we want to do it. We might understand what we want to do. But one of the biggest challenges we have in churches is who's going to do it? Who's going to do that? It could be my dogs who are clearly running about outside my study at the moment. But who's going to do that? Do you have someone that can do it? Is it you? Is it going to be you pressing buttons as well as preaching? Is it going to be you standing at the back of the church when you're doing 100 other jobs, as well as welcoming people and sweeping up afterwards? Who will do it is one of the biggest questions that we have. Who will do it? Is it our responsibility as ministers? Is it folks in the congregation who step up? One of the biggest challenges we have is trying to expand a team and trying to look at what we can do. Now, it's true, live streaming doesn't actually have to be that difficult. If you've got one of these and any brand of phone will work, you can live stream. If you've got a microphone that you can plug in, you can live stream. If you've got an internet signal or a 3G signal, then you can live stream. In everything that we do, we can do it. But what extra stress does that put upon us as practitioners, as people who are leading worship? Perhaps there's people in the community, not yet part of the church, who might be able to offer services, those who work in IT or who have an interest in it at school or at college or university, those who are keen enthusiasts and are looking for a way to serve in the church, or who don't even know yet what the church is. One of the things that we've done in Greyfriars is to build a small team around us, a small team who understand these things. I don't really. I just know how to make them work after they've set them up. But there are people out there to help, people like Faith Online or Sanctus Media. There are people out there that can help, such as Carta and the advisors in the General Assemblies or the General Trustees departments. Looking for a team, trying to devise who that might be, trying to look for people who can do the technical or people who might be able to record some of the content. There's no doubt it's challenging, but equally, if you can find them and can grow, then it pays dividends. And finally, who will do it? Do we need every church to live stream? Do we need every church to put their efforts into every aspect of church life? Does every church need a boys' brigade company? Does every church need a women's guild, or guild as they're now known? Or can we focus on our strengths and look and see where we can excel as a congregation, a community of faith, and use our gifts to help other people? Perhaps this is the time that we need to be working collaboratively with our colleagues in other congregations as well, and actually looking at how we can help facilitate something together, not apart, and then enable the mission of God to flow within that. So we have a why, we have a who might do it, but that's all very well, even if we have a team. But if we have a team, what is it that we're going to be able to do? And I'm going to invite Jeremy to lead us in that section.
Thank you, Brian. And I just want to, I realized that, that when you asked me the question of how did all this start for me, actually, I should have gone back probably about another decade, because the church I was in at the time, St. Martin's in Cambridge, one of the members of the congregation was really enthusiastic about this this YouTube thing and said, we should start, I can't remember if it was streaming or recording and posting on YouTube. Sure, go for it. And so for a long period, I was probably the world's tiniest YouTube star, but we didn't think about it at all. So I remember being vaguely interested. Oh, am I visible on YouTube somewhere? We didn't think it through. And it didn't matter to us. It was a novelty, I suppose. But now all of this has been forced on us at least to start thinking about it. So what are we going to stream, and to whom are we going to stream it? I'm going to start with the to whom, and I think it's really important to lean into a very uncomfortable point. I think uncomfortable for most of us, that as soon as you start thinking about streaming, you're going to come across the term audience. And I hope it's slightly uncomfortable. That's just what the terminology is. So we both need to embrace it. Otherwise, if you go and if you start thinking about it, you'll discover you need to use that term audience, because that's how the online world thinks. But we don't really want audiences in the sense of people who are just going to watch and listen and then move on. We want meaningful connection, not just viewers. But I think it's important to recognize that a lot of us, and certainly me, in our first efforts in streaming, really we've been thinking about how do we get what we're already doing out to people. But if we're trying to create a meaningful connection and not just get some viewers or some statistics to count, then we're going to have to build that into the experience that we're offering in streaming. And we're going to have to build that around the experience in streaming. And I'm going to come back to what does this whole streaming question raise for us. How can we make use of the opportunities of streaming beyond simply the live stream? So live streaming isn't just broadcasting, but it does start with that. The value of live streaming certainly isn't just numbers. What's your audience? But if you're not looking at that at all, then you're really not involved. You're a bit like me with my first experience of YouTube. I wasn't even thinking about the fact there was a camera taking pictures, there was my voice going out somewhere, and I had no idea what was coming next. So we need to start thinking about the who. So as I say, I'm starting with the who, and I'm going to say to you, you might be wanting me to give you the answer to this, but you've actually got to make some choices. Because who is this for? If you think about it seriously, you're going to get more than one answer. And actually, church has always been a bit of a compromise. We gather together in a heterogeneous group, hopefully very, very diverse, with diverse interests, but we manage one experience and we try and engage with everybody. And one of the problems online is, one of the delights as well, is that from the perspective of the person the other end of the stream, it's just them. They're on their own connecting with you. So if the experience isn't right for them, then their patience with it may be, well, it may be much less than while sitting, having stepped into a church. And, well, most people don't then shuffle out and say, this isn't for me today. But online, people can disappear at any moment. And in fact, they could just wander away. I think there have been some studies done. Quite a lot of people turn on and just keep it in the background, like they would television or radio. So who is watching? And that answer is going to change over time. And I think probably for most of us who are gathered, you've shown by the fact you've come along that you're interested in that question. Who should we be speaking to? Who will we be speaking to? How will we connect with them? So I'm going to suggest you start thinking about the different groups and just work through it. I suppose the first group is fairly obvious. People who would love to be in church, but they need to stay away. And who are they? Well, they're probably already people that you know. Don't be afraid to actually make a list and just say it's this person, this person, this person. Those are people who want to feel connected. They don't want to feel forgotten. They certainly don't want to feel that they're getting like a second-hand church or a second-best experience of church. But they want familiarity. So that group of people may change over time. At the moment, that group may be everybody because of COVID restrictions. And then it may be some people because of COVID restrictions. But on a November evening, it may be everybody who doesn't want to venture out on this cold, dark, slippery night. So there's that group. Who are the other groups? I suppose, again, for most of us, they'll be the people who are a bit connected with the church, people we probably are aware of, people who are interested and curious, who have some familiarity with church but aren't necessarily that involved. And those are the people that you want to actively build a stronger connection with, but you can't assume that they want what you have historically had. Because apart from anything else, there's every chance that that group is people who are a little bit younger, a little bit more diverse, a little bit busier, a little bit less churchy than your core congregation. So a good experience for them is going to be different than the people who just want church as it always is. It's going to also have to actively invite them. I don't know about your experience with running church programs of all sorts. In general, if you put something on and you don't publicize it, nobody's going to find out about it. And if there's nothing that follows on from the event that you run, then you might have a great time, but where does it go? In the web world, call to action. What is your call to action for those people who are just interested, they're just browsing, they're just passing through, they've got some visibility? Well, how can you invite them? Or what can you invite them to do? What can you offer to do with them? What favor might you like to ask them? How do you actively engage? Again, we'll come back to that what in a moment. Those are just a couple of groups, and we're working from the kind of core committed church members out and out and out. And if that starts to feel like mission planning in some form, well, no surprise. Because if you're thinking seriously already about mission, the work that you've done as you've drawn up mission programs and strategies is going to help you with those answers about those who's. And if you haven't already been doing that, or if you haven't done that recently, the work you're going to do around streaming is going to help you develop that mission, because it'll have you thinking about those individual people. Because again, remember that from the perspective of the person the other side of the stream, it's just them. And if you're speaking to everyone, you're speaking to no one. Okay, so let's go back to the what. What are you going to live stream? And of course, if you've started with the who, then that gives you a framework. You can begin from those audiences, to use the uncomfortable term, and think, what do they want? What will appeal to them? What will engage them? And perhaps for a lot of us, if we don't have a big team, we'll have to make a decision for one of those groups. But then over time, as we get more familiar with the technology, maybe we can start to work with a couple of the groups, kind of Sunday regulars, but something midweek or something unexpected or something occasional. And we've got to think for the what. But one of the great things about the online world is we have so many tools that we can use well. We need to think visually for live streaming, but we also can be creative about the audio on a live stream. If we're live streaming a church service, then there's still a bit of creativity needed around that service. Areas like titling and visuals and so on for the streaming audience are going to be slightly different than what's there for the people who are there in purpose. It needs to be creative and it needs to be varied, because most of us want some familiarity, but we don't just want to sit and watch the same old thing again and again. I don't mean reinvent everything. Don't throw everything you've ever learnt about church, about services, about worship, and about prayer away. But do start to think carefully, how can we use this medium well? And how do we do live interaction well? Again, one of the reasons I think we all got excited about the possibility of this little series is we're using a technology and we're inviting questions and answers. We've already had some comments going on screen, acknowledging the people who are watching and engaging actively with them. That's one of the great opportunities about online. And I don't know how many times, for those of you who lead or speak actively on front in church, one of the great challenges face to face is to get people actively involved. But online, people naturally want to be involved. They naturally want to comment, to like. And we need to get used to encouraging that, to responding to the likes and the shares and the comments that people are making. So the challenge for all of us, at least I think of it this way, is that we can't have something for everyone. But if we just default to saying we're going to put our historic in-church experience on a stream, then I don't think that's for anyone. I don't think it'll go anywhere. I think it will just be an effort that doesn't produce any kind of fruit. It won't be a missional thing. We have to start thinking. And I'm going to come back to a point I made just to finish, which is let's think about what goes along with the streaming. Because if we're just streaming an event and it's done, again, however hard we work on the creative exercise, it won't necessarily draw people in actively. And so an email list, do you have one yet? That's something which needs to be part of this whole exercise. Why did you come along today? Probably at least in part because you had an email saying, please do that, to remind you. Perhaps had good intentions, but the email helps you with that. Do you have a telephone strategy? Do you know who the people are that you want to be keeping actively in contact with? Again, plenty of us have built up practices and teams where we're actively doing phone calling during COVID. Well, let's not stop that. Let's just change the shape of how we're using it. And of course, lots of us are having live, fully interactive visual or audio-visual events through things like Zoom and Whereby and Microsoft Teams. Again, none of that goes away. And in the world of streaming, drawing people into different levels of experience is natural. But it doesn't just happen by magic. We have to start using our streamed services to draw people into that. And again, my very, very final note before I bring Brian back in to compare is to remember that when we're live streaming, we are live, but also we're live-ish. Usually there's a bit of a delay of a few seconds, but some people are dipping in and out and plenty of people are watching later. So what we're creating is building up a repository. It's building up some information. It's building up some experience. People can start to discover who we are and what we're about from all of the videos will build up from past live streams. And I'm not suggesting get obsessed with those statistics, but I find it really encouraging to see that there are, within Facebook and YouTube particularly, there are tools for helping people to discover what's popular. And I can discover that too and learn from it. So back to you, Brian. Oops.
Managed. I think we both pressed the button at exactly the same time to take me in and out. There's some great questions and points coming up there, and we're going to come to some of them just in a little bit. But what we're wanting to do is hear from Neil now, who's going to share a little bit about the practicality, the how, and that initial planning and how we might get to there. So, Neil, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Before you get too excited that I'm about to start talking cables, plugs, and connectors, you're going to have to wait a week or two for that session. Today is really just setting the scene and getting things organized so that when it comes to things like plugs, cables, and connectors, and cameras, and all sorts of exciting things, we have our ducks in a row. Leading on what Brian and Jeremy have said, as we look into how are we going to make this happen? How are we going to bring folks with us? Purpose is everything. Why are we doing this? Now, for some, it will be a reaction to COVID and not being in the building. For others, it will be this is a mission outreach proposition that we want to reach folks in our community who we're not reaching through our other means. And for others, it will be, oh, this is a new tech thing. Maybe we should get into this. But ultimately, I would hope to convince you that your purpose is ultimately missional and is a chance to reach out to those beyond the building walls. And in doing that, I think you're setting yourself up for a case to bring before your committees and your congregation for why this is a good idea and why this is going to be a wonderful extension, perhaps even transformational to you and your congregation. So in my experience of working alongside churches who have been looking to put in live streaming, I've come across a variety of situations, but they all boil down to certain key elements, and I want to summarize some of these here this afternoon. The first thing is you need to get support from your key decision-making body. Now, I'm going to use the word Kirk Session here because in my tradition, the Church of Scotland, that would be the most appropriate body. For you, you may need to insert your own key committee or group or management group there. But the essence is this is the key decision-making body whose support you want from the get-go before you've purchased a cable, before you've looked down the camera lens. And you want to share with them the purpose for why you are going to do this. And indeed what difference it might make and what extension it might bring to the ministry of your congregation. And in selling that enthusiastically, we hope you'll begin to meet challenges, of course, and there will be objections, and there will be, I don't want to be in television, and I've heard that, and we can't put the children on, and we can't play music, and you'll hear all sorts of things about what you can and can't do, and graciously you're going to just listen to all of these. And many of these answers you won't have yet, although by the end of our 6-week series, we hope you'll have a lot more of them. But it's okay to confess, look, I don't know the answer to these, but as we work through this proposition, I want to get the answers to these for you, so that you can, at a later date perhaps, come back armed with all the information that your decision-making body needs to make a good, confident decision. One of the key elements that often comes up, safeguarding, data protection, copyright. We'll touch on some of those today with our next speaker this afternoon. And in the future weeks, we'll touch on a few more. But it's okay to say you don't have the answers. That doesn't mean this project can't succeed. It just means some more research is going to be important. Setting a timetable is also going to be important. Many church projects, live streaming or not, often falter or take years because there's no defined timetable in place. Any project manager will tell you that a plan, a budget, and a deadline are key ingredients to make for a successful project. So set yourself a target. It has to be achievable, but it could also be ambitious too, in order to encourage folks to step up to the wheel. And finally, you want to press your group for a decision. It may be something they can't take on the spot. It may be you're going to come back on a future occasion with more information, but it's going to be important when we get to the next group that this group has decided, yes, live streaming is an important part of our ministry. We're going to invest probably money in doing it. We're going to invest time, and we're going to invest people in making it happen. Why are we doing all this? For the purpose that we've previously identified. So then we get to the congregation, and it's important too to communicate early with your congregation about live streaming. For there too, you will likely meet objection and perhaps even resistance to this idea. But the earlier you bring them on board, the more smooth, in my experience, your journey will be. You want to share with them first and primarily the purpose of why we're live streaming and what difference it's going to make to the life, work, and witness of your congregation. Share with them an opportunity. If you can you share testimony with another congregation that you know has engaged with live streaming and has some stories to tell? There's nothing like a real life testimony in order to help convince someone of your premise. You can still confess there are unknowns you don't have answers to yet about perhaps safeguarding or cost or timetabling. I think you should offer a chance to consult with your congregation, a chance to hear the challenges they might have, also to hear the ideas that they might have about things that they've seen perhaps on the internet that they think, oh, wouldn't it be great if our church could do this? But having a chance to let them air their views will be important in getting them on stream, no pun intended, as well. And also share with them your timetable, that this is not going to take forever, but equally the congregation will need to come to a mind about either stepping up to the plate, being involved, or at least not being an obstacle to progress. Next, you need to begin to line up your people. Notice in all of this, we're not at cables and cameras yet. Many people think live streaming is all about just getting our kit in. Believe me, that's just day one of a multi-year experience and journey. Perhaps one of the first things you might do with your Kirk session is raise the notion of an internet elder. Perhaps you have a postal elder for people in remote districts. Why not have an elder whose job it is to pastor to those folks in your new online community? And I think that will be an interesting step for many Kirk sessions to engage with. I think you want to begin looking around for folks to be in your tech team. Young or old, there are roles for everybody on the tech team in managing that week in and week out. Churches run on rotas. This will be no news to you, whether it's the flower rota, the minibus rota, the reading rota, the tea and coffee rota, the welcome rota. There are many, many rotas, and don't kid ourselves on, this is one more. Money you can acquire, you can fundraise for, you can spend, and you can buy the kit. Your team is a lot harder to acquire, and their commitment week in and week out is going to be important. But also, don't neglect paying for support. Many congregations pay for an organist or musicians perhaps to accompany and help lead the worship. Maybe if the only way you're going to get to move forward is to pay a tech person, then I think you should consider that. If these folks are also enabling worship in the same way that musicians do, by enhancing the experience to get it out of your four walls and into somebody's home, then if you think, I don't have tech people, then maybe you can buy a tech person in the same way that other congregations might buy the services of a professional musician in order to do that. So don't discount that just because we're so used to trying to do everything on a shoestring. This might be a way forward for churches that feel, I don't have anyone I think who could manage this. I think you want to involve an outreach team, and even with a C, as I've just spotted a spelling mistake in this slide, but this is an outreach endeavour. And how will folks find out about your live stream? How what messages will you go? It's not just TV. It's not just watching in like a voyeur on a Sunday morning, watching other people worship. But this is a chance to outreach. Also, pastoral support. I think your team there also need to be engaged, because the folks at the other end are in no means virtual. We use this word virtual all the time. I hate it. There's nothing virtual at all, either about the relationship, about the technology, or about the people who are watching in at their homes. So those folks have needs and cares and wants and challenges, and your pastoral team needs to find a way to minister to them in the same way they do the folks sitting in pews right in front of you. And finally, your comms team in messaging, in advertising and promotion. Unlike a church building, people don't walk past your website and think, oh, I think I'll just pop in. It needs to be promoted. Perhaps now is the time to stop spending 50 quid a week on advertising in the local newspaper that nobody buys, and to spend £50 a week on Facebook advertising instead. And perhaps there's a thought for your comms team to consider. Last two slides, just coming up with some advanced planning. Internet is probably the thing with the longest lead time, because if you don't have internet in your church and you're going to get, for example, BT or other providers exist to put it in, that might involve laying cable, sorting out a contract, getting a telephone line in. That's a multi-week, if not a multi-month proposition. I need to get started early. The location for your kit and any planned works that you might think about doing will be part of your costing. Permissions from your own internal committees and groups, from your presbyteries or synods, and perhaps from your national church, and for the Church of Scotland, that will be the general trustees. And in the weeks to come, we'll have more conversation about that, all to get to a place where you can get your costs all sorted out. What kind of things are in your costs? Well, internet, that's a monthly cost. Your cameras, your streaming box, a server, depending where you're going to put all this video content once you've created it, copyright. These are year in and year out costs which will need to be budgeted for, and we'll be touching those in the weeks to come. That's all I really want to say at this stage about getting your ducks in a row, and there's some detail about some of these things that we'll be covering in weeks to come. But I'm going to pass on now back to Brian, who's going to introduce us to David, perhaps to take us to one of the first levels of detail on safeguarding and data protection.
Thanks, Neil. And one of the questions that came up, or one of the comments that came up a little bit earlier, was from Mike, who said that being forced into going live over COVID has really advanced things for session and congregation.
That's true.
Didn't really see the value, and now we're doing it. It's just part of what we do. And I think that's really interesting, because there are these issues that are there. We are aware that some churches have advanced very quickly without having a background in it, but that can also come with some challenges and some dangers as well, when we don't fully understand what it is that we're doing and we've not kind of pre-planned things. Isn't that fair, Neil?
I think so. And there's a parable about that, and a wise man and a house and rock, and so on and so forth. And yes, many churches, and I'll use the word knee-jerk, and I don't mean that to be insulting, but many churches have tried to react quickly to put live streaming in place. But I might say that those who go into this a bit more intentionally, and with the benefit of advanced planning, I suspect will have a smoother journey and greater longevity, because starting with purpose, they have a story to tell all the way through from beginning to end. And so I hope to convince you that spending time in purpose and planning is well worth it. And the parable, to complete my 3 Ps, is our encouragement, I think, to put that into place.
Absolutely. And Stephen's also put on, just following on from that they're at the point of considering live stream, but sense a kind of greater resistance to the idea of audio-visual and screens in the building, and any idea about how to overcome rejections. Well, Stephen, we are going to be coming on to that, I think, in week 3, just later on in this month. So hold that, and we'll try and address that later on. But Neil, thank you for just now, and I'm going to invite David to come and share with us some of the kind of legal issues that are around this, and actually we might even hide behind some of these issues at times, but there actually might be ways that we can use them and be able to keep on the right side of the law, but still be able to do what we want to advance that mission. So David, thanks. It's lovely to have you here with us, and I'll hand over to you.
That's great. Well, thank you very much, Brian. It's interesting, Neil's parable made me think about GDPR, all of a sudden data protection issues, and GDPR having the clout of rock, but often can feel a bit like sand. If you try to grasp it, it seems to slip away, or you think you might know exactly what to do, and you get other advice. So I will touch upon data protection issues in relation to live streaming, but not in great detail for these present purposes, because there can be, well, it's highly fact specific is what it boils down to. So different congregations might face different challenges. And if in the course of these online events, various questions are raised around data protection, I'd be happy to come back when I can and address any point arising. My plan here is to go through some further initial considerations, really based and following upon what Neil had to say, things like governance issues, etc. Having a think about data protection issues that will come up, and perhaps some other legal matters that might not be at the forefront of somebody's mind when they are looking at live streaming. So turning first to issues around things like good governance, as Neil had flagged up, it is important for the governing bodies of the congregation in question, or other body that might be looking at live streaming, to have ownership of it. There's charity law implications around mission and ensuring that the goals of the church are being met. There are financial implications, of course, in relation to purchasing equipment. There might be employment law issues with regard to organists or other people who might need to be employed for operating the equipment. So any number of initial considerations to take account of when thinking about live streaming. And for those involved with the Church of Scotland, the Law Department is, of course, here to assist with matters that might arise from it, from that process. And we have things like template contracts on the Church of Scotland website. Neil also mentioned sourcing equipment. And again, from a legal point of view, we have to be careful about how we go about installing equipment, if things are going to be removed from walls, for example, and ensure that the owners of the property are properly consulted, or any other parties do have some input into it. So, for example, with relation to the Church of Scotland, the general trustees have been mentioned, as often the church buildings might be vested in them. And also we have the Committee on Church Art and Architecture, which can assist congregations with considering placing of cameras or running cables or making changes to the fabric of their buildings. It's also, I think, worth bearing in mind the frequency of transmission, how often live streaming is going to occur. We have mentioned that post-COVID, it's a very regular occurrence indeed. Going forward, it might be maintained at the level or perhaps reduced, but the frequency of live streaming will, of course, impact on data protection considerations and how you interact with the congregation and how they are aware of when they might be involved with live streaming, and in particular when their images might be captured. So that takes us on to the start of data protection considerations and informing the congregation. Now, ideally, information should be available to the congregation in advance of the proposed filming. This would be the dates, times, and ideally even locations of where cameras will be placed and where they can sit within the church itself should they not wish to appear on camera. I know that there has been some concern that every single person who might be attending worship and who might appear on camera will need to sign a consent form, but that isn't the case from my point of view. It'd certainly be very difficult, if not impossible, to obtain written consent from every person crossing the threshold. especially given the present concerns around COVID and how we manage flows of people. So in terms of a practical approach, there are some recommendations about how this might be approached, which can include including a notice in a service intimation or any newsletter or information circulated to members of the congregation, specifying the areas and or pews that will be in the view of the camera, and again, the times, dates that filming will occur. At the start of each service that is to be filmed or streamed, the minister would be well placed to not only welcome the congregation present in the building, but also those tuned in and watching online. They should also remind people in the congregation at the outset that the filming is taking place and that the broadcast will go out online. Now, the issue here is that where things go out onto the internet, then the church loses direct control of that information. So people need to be aware that the church can only take responsibility for the information that it truly holds. Visible notices should be placed on the way into the church and in areas where the camera lens will focus. And I think it's a good idea, where possible, to demarcate the area in the church building that will appear on, well, be captured by the camera and then later appear on screen, on the basis that people could visually take cues and determine where they might want to sit or not, as the case may be. Unless prior consent has been obtained in relation to children or at-risk adults, really cameras should avoid capturing images of those categories of people. So again, that takes us into the governance issues around who should be involved in the decision-making process. And Neil mentioned the safeguarding panel, and that is certainly a very good idea. That also feeds into the idea of where cameras should be located and set. So and this will be entirely fact dependent on the church and determining the best angles that might be captured, etc. But as a whole picture, we're trying to ensure that people coming into the church are aware that their information is going to be captured, their information being their image, or anything else that they might say in the course of the service, their name, for example. What's going to be happening with that information? It's going to be streamed online. Ideally, you'd want to tell people where it's going to appear, so they have an informed idea of whether or not they want to take part in it. And they should have a rough idea of how long that information is going to be available. If it's a case we capture a recording, if it's going to be available online indefinitely, I think people should be told that this information will be out there indefinitely. There should be no particular harm in that, but again, it's just a matter of people having information so they can properly make a decision that best suits themselves. Now, that's a very general topical look at some of the data protection issues that might arise. And of course, data protection, as I mentioned, is a far more complicated area of law and highly fact dependent and specific. So if there are questions that come up as we go along, then perhaps we can look at addressing those in greater detail. There are a few other points that might not be so obvious in relation to things like copyright and the fact that live music performed during regular worship services or weddings or funerals is exempt from copyright. That, of course, does not then require a license, but live streaming is not exempt. So it's important to consider that if a congregation is hosting a live stream on its own website, then a suitable license is required unless all of the music involved is in the public domain. And there's furthermore specific information about this available from the Church of Scotland website. And that takes us on to where a congregation might broadcast or you upload a pre-recorded film to YouTube or Facebook or other platforms that may well have their own existing licensing arrangements. So the key rule of thumb there is be aware of what you're going to be live streaming to, what platform you might be using, and whether or not you need to think about licensing and copyright issues. Again, if specific guidance on those points is required within the Church of Scotland context, then the law department of the church can assist. And I think what I'll do is I'll just move ahead onto the issues around safeguarding and just flagging up that congregations should have their own safeguarding panels. And as Neil pointed out earlier, there may be situations where there are children or vulnerable adults in the congregation who, for whatever reason, should not be part of that filming. So the safeguarding panel can be involved in the very initial or early stages of the decision-making process and inform the Kirk session or the governing bodies about how best to approach those issues that might arise. And that should keep congregations on the right side of the law. And as pointed out in the parable, ensuring that the foundation for live streaming is indeed based on a rock. I think it's a helpful point to bear in mind. So that is where I intend to leave it. Brian, if you want me to address any particular questions at this point, I'm happy to do so.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of have come in, and I think there are some interesting ones, and these are things that we've certainly grappled with in our own congregation. And Anne says the children are always invited out to be beside her at the young folk time, and she would hate to stop that for online reasons. And I think it's more, about common sense and encouraging families to know that, certainly the way that we've dealt with it, that families know that will be recorded. And if the children don't want to be on, and we have that in holiday clubs, if people have protection reasons that they can't have photographs taken, we might move them to the side or still include them some way.
Yeah.
There might still be ways to do that, isn't there, David? Is that fair?
There is. I think it's a good point to make, that the analogy of the holiday club will apply here. We're simply using an online environment. So where is the case that children are vulnerable, then they shouldn't have their photographs taken in the holiday club environment anyway. So there should be pre-existing safeguarding issues within the congregation to address those points. So again, that's why it's important to have the safeguarding panel on board from an early stage. But certainly there's nothing inherent about using online streaming or the online environment that means that children can't take part. I've got children myself, and we're involved in a local church, and I would hate them to be prevented from taking part in church because it's online. And because it's online, it might sound scary, but it shouldn't be. It's a matter of trying to facilitate worship, trying to facilitate people being able to engage properly with their church. And a lot of that, Brian, as you said, based on common sense, taking steps to obtain consent from parents around children attending. Well, looking at my own church, what happens is they would use consent forms for the children, not for all the adults, because that is simply, it's a bit impractical. But with regard to the children who are engaged with the Sunday school activities, holiday clubs, etc., there is a form that's used from the outset every year. They fill out the form, details are recorded, and the parents can say, I am happy for them to appear in photographs. If they're happy enough for them to appear in photographs, then that can extend to being online. But the safest thing is to tick all those boxes to ensure that parents know that the filming is occurring and that they're happy for their kids to take part in it.
And there will always be those occasions when it doesn't always go according to plan, and you might be live streaming a service where you think you've got everyone's permission to be there, and a child who is visiting toddles up onto the chancel and across and has their big starring song and dance high kick moment in the middle of Will Your Anchor Hold or whatever it is. Sometimes things are unavoidable.
Indeed.
Yeah, and it's about perspective at that point, isn't it?
Yeah, proportionality, perspective. The ICO have bigger fish to fry than an average congregation, I would hope anyway. And it is the case that what is required is for everybody involved with data protection issues to take proportionate and reasonable steps. So it would be unreasonable to keep all of the children in the congregation cordoned off in one corner, not released until after the live streaming is over. So it's a matter of just taking what steps you can to ensure that everybody is aware of what's going on and that they're content with it.
Okay, two more questions at this point for you, David, and one from Chris about how do you cater for a choir who will be in shot behind the minister during all the video shooting? Would that have to be part of the acceptance of being in a choir that they're going to sing? I suppose you might reasonably have a corner that isn't filmed, or a behind the pulpit shot or something, and clever placement of people who might want to sing but not appear on the live stream.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because it raises the prerequisite issue. So the second part of that question said, will the acceptance of being on film be a prerequisite to being in the choir? And now that's something you need to avoid because the data protection legislation is to the effect that taking part in activity shouldn't be a prerequisite in all cases to having that consent. So if it's a case that the choir is appearing, obviously the choir needs to know that they're going to be filmed. If anybody's unhappy about being in the film, being captured by the camera, then steps have to be made to try to accommodate them. Where that simply isn't possible, where there isn't somewhere they can stand that wouldn't be in the frame, then they would have to excuse themselves from the choir. So it wouldn't be the choir saying, you're allowed to join us. It would be a matter of that individual making the decision for themselves that they can't partake in that activity because they do not wish to appear on the televised, the recorded broadcast.
And I think it's not about worrying too much about things, whether it's choir or children. And I think there's a danger that we worry and we throw our hands up in the air and say, well, if a child doesn't sign a form or a parent doesn't sign a form, they can't take part in that all-age talk part. And I think some folk have put on chat about sensible camera angles might be able to help, or if there is a tech person that knows that area shouldn't be looked at and how you do it. And it's the same, and I know we don't live stream holiday clubs, but in our holiday club, if there's a child that isn't allowed to be photographed, we will often tell one of the leaders just to watch out for them. And when we take photographs, sit them to the side or just behind them so that they're not included, but they still feel a part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's practical solutions.
Yeah.
And again, the key principle here is ensuring that people are aware of the fact that they might be filmed and then deciding for themselves whether or not they are comfortable with taking part in that. So we're not trying to, treat anybody unfairly. That's certainly not the objective. It's simply a matter of trying to say, we're trying to open the church as widely as possible. We're trying to be proactive. Here, we're going to tell you as much as we can about how we're going to do that. And if you feel like you can't join in that particular aspect, let us know. We'll try to accommodate it so far as we're able. And ultimately, if that can't be accommodated for whatever reason, then it's really a matter for that individual to decide whether they can take part or not.
And in a situation where perhaps there's been a family or there's been a breakup and one parent and child ought not to be known where they are for their own safety, there is a difficulty in that, because churches and worship is actually public anyway, and it's very difficult to stop somebody coming in to see if people are there. And I think the live streaming is an extension of that, and we have to take every available opportunity. I mean, for example, in Greyfriars, in my own church, we never film anyone above the balcony line. So we know that if anyone needs to be out of shot for safety reasons or for anything, then there's a whole section of the church they can sit in and not be a part of. So I think there are ways that you can do that. And finally, David, one question that's come in from Donald about copyright and things, about live music in church and not broadcast or recorded is exempt from copyright license requirement for worship cases. What about, it will be interesting when we move to a more hybrid model of church in person and online. And I suppose, is it right that then it would be the bit that needs licensed trumps the bit that doesn't need licensed and would be exempt?
In short, yes. I mean, I definitely think there are challenges ahead there, and a number of congregations have been caught out in the past. And usually, it's not with music; it's with written words appearing in newsletters, etc., and or publishing things online without having the correct permissions. And of course, without those permissions, then you're in breach of copyright and subject to being fined, etc. So it really is a matter of being very aware of what information or what music, what words are being used, where they're coming from, whether permission's been granted, or if simple attribution will get you over the line. Some people are perfectly happy for poems, if, for example, they've written to be used, providing that they are acknowledged in the use of them. And in terms of copyright of music in general, I'm not a copyright lawyer, and it's not my area of expertise, I'd have to say. So I think the best thing to do is if a congregation has any particular concerns around copyright, come back to the law department, and one of my colleagues or myself, given enough time to read into it thoroughly, can provide a very informed opinion and view. But nonetheless, I think Donald's highlighted an important consideration that all congregations really must consider very carefully about what they're using, how they're using it, whether or not they need licenses.
Yeah, absolutely. And David, I'm aware that your time is precious, and I'm grateful that you've stayed on a few extra minutes, and we're going to let you go and back to your real life. But thank you for the time you've spent with us and for those questions and for the willingness to engage. And hopefully if people have extra questions, then the law department from the Church of Scotland would be a good place to answer those. So thank you very much for being with us, and we'll let you go now. Thanks, David.
Okay, no problem at all. Thank you. Take care.
And I'm going to bring in Neil and Jeremy back in because, there's our Dallas view again. As said, it's a bit exciting, that, isn't it? But there have been some interesting questions asked throughout, and in terms of the and just when we leave copyright, Ellen has just said that there was an image in a church newsletter on the website that brought a copyright claim that cost the church. And it does happen. It does happen that people trawl. Neil?
Yeah, the way to avoid all these copyright things, of course, is to pass someone's palm with silver. And typically that's something like CCLI. And in a few weeks' time, we will have a session more dedicated to copyright. But I will say that those of you who were early adopters of the CCLI streaming license might have missed the fact that there's now a CCLI Streaming Plus license, which costs £1 or £2 more, granted, but it lets you do more things, including play commercial music. So if you got that license thinking we're all sorted, be aware there are new products now available from CCLI, which may suit you better, and it might be worth revisiting the licensing that you have just on that.
Yeah. And licensing does cost money. There's no doubt about it. Just ask my treasurer. Every year he asks if we need all this license. And every year I say yes. And next year there will be more, I guarantee it. But it is where we go. There was some interesting, just jumping back onto some of the who and the what we do, there were some interesting questions that came up in terms of participation and how we perhaps participate from home. It's easy, perhaps, if you're sitting at a computer leading worship, to see some of the comments that are coming in. It's much more difficult in a church environment. But there was Sam put up a wonderful comment that in their family service, their children monitor the social media and have a microphone so that when the congregation are asked a question in the building, the online responses are read out for everyone to hear. That's a lovely idea, isn't it? Of trying to mix the in-person and the more remote aspects of congregation.
And certainly for me, I think just recognizing we're at an early stage of discovering what this hybrid model is going to look like. And the question I always try and keep in mind is, are we enabling everybody, however they're participating, to take an active part in ministry? Because that's really difficult. But if that question is always there, then you're always asking, okay, how can I help that to work better? And we don't have all the answers yet, and some of them are technology dependent and so on. But if we keep that question foregrounded, then I think we're going to be experimental in a good and positive way. And if people are coming along that journey and appreciating it, we'll discover as we go the best practices.
I'm going to make a kind of general point, actually, which touches in on this point, but also just a few more of the points that came later on down the thread about change. And depending on how ambitious, I'll use the word, your aspirations are, then I think change inside the building and indeed the service structure is going to be important. Are you just going to film what already happens in your building for the benefit of those who are outside it? Or are you going to have online participants an essential and integral part of your church service? And that might mean changing things. That might mean changing the way you interact with the children. That might mean changing where the choir sit. That might mean hearing more from the congregation, in those who are in the building and those who are online. The folks who are online are typically more chatty than the folks in the pews. It's very rare. I mean, I guess it's slightly more rare for the person in the pew to shout out loud, "I hate this hymn, and we're singing it again." Whereas somebody online might put that into Facebook. But how do we hear all the voices, and how do we hear them equally? And I think, for those going into live streaming with planning and purpose, my words again, then I think this could be the beginning of a tremendous transformation of church service experiences, not just filming what you already do.
And I think Mike made that point earlier on, how does it become participative for those who are at home rather than just a poor substitute for sitting in the building? And we do, there's a really interesting opportunity that we have here at this point in time. We can't fit everyone in our buildings that we did a year ago. This is a really good positive way of being able to have people there that might not ordinarily be able to be there, to fit in and to do. But to get that right, we need to give them a good experience. I often liken it to the church magazine. How often have we seen a church newsletter come through the door and you're actually more interested in the junk mail that came from the local political group because it looks better than the badly photocopied squint church newsletter that has a recipe for fruit bread that no one's ever going to make, but it filled a quarter of a page. It's the same with live streaming. We need these things to stand up. And unfortunately, I think Mike said it earlier on in the comments as well, if we want people to be a part of our community, of our worshiping community, we have to have something that means they want to be a part of that rather than switch on the professionals or the songs of praise or reflections in the key. Not that those aren't good. I'm not making any judgment on them, but it doesn't give that same sense of local community and local expression of faith.
Just for once, it's worth leaning into the fact that there's about 20 years, well, more than that, but certainly 20 years of experience of online platforms building something they call engagement. And so the tools which we get for free are designed to do that job. And I think that's one of the challenges. It can feel very limiting. But for instance, there are loads of events that we try and run as churches that don't work well participatively with more than 10, 15, 20 people. But actually, online reshapes that completely. So I think there are huge opportunities to do all kinds of very engaging activities. And again, I think to echo Neil's point, if we're just thinking very Sunday service centric and we're just trying to distribute out this thing we're already doing somewhere else, then I guess we're not going to move forward. But if we say we have these exciting new tools and they come with, on Sunday, we've got particular challenges. There are so many great things that we can be doing. I just think this is a wonderful opportunity.
And I think some of that, some of the responsibility for that transformational change will land with the preacher and the minister, especially regarding the engagement of people. One of the things that's always challenged me is that, on a Sunday morning, unless you can arrange flowers or play a guitar or a keyboard, it's very difficult for the church to receive the gifts of God's people during that service. And yet, what if Facebook and its pals have taught us nothing? If they've taught us nothing over the last 20 years, as you comment, Jeremy, that people can self-contribute anything and everything, and indeed do. Millions of hours worth of videos uploaded every minute, or whatever the statistic might be. How can the church, and even more radically, how can it live receive the gifts of God's people in an ambience? Can you imagine a church service taking part like this, for example, with live interaction with the comments of God's people during the service? Now, some ministers might go and rail against the idea. Some, I hope, might think that would be interesting, at the very least, to explore. How would Sunday worship look like in this format, with several people and live engagement? And I think this is a real opportunity for those who have a little bit of wherewithal and desire to think out of the box creatively. Because I think COVID, if it has any silver lining, it has been, as Mike pointed out earlier, it has hastened the adoption of technology and the acceptance of technology amongst many people who wouldn't have touched it with a barge pole a year ago are now thinking it's now just ordinary. So the time is as ripe as it has ever been to engage with such things.
And I'm going to say something and put it out there, but as a minister, do you know, I'm quite snobby about worship, and I think most ministers are. And do you know, and it's funny because we wouldn't allow anyone just to stand up in church and expound what they think. That's just not the way that we do things. It needs to be properly thought out and trained, or at least that's what I try and tell myself. But yet we do have people sometimes, just occasionally, who aren't the greatest musicians or singers playing a part, or who don't know how to flower arrange, plonking a vase of flowers together, and that's okay. But the worship part, the teaching, for some reason, we have to think professionally about that. And actually, there might be an authenticity about this type of thing, Neil, about allowing people to share with the congregation, share with that community of which they're a part, some of their thoughts on that story. And actually, just occasionally, it might even be better than those of us who think we know what we're doing as well. I mean, Jeremy, what's that like in the Church of England for you guys?
Well, one of the things, not to divert, I'll come back to that direct question, but one of the things which Neil's comment was making me think is, again, part of the world in YouTube is the idea of a video response. So that way of starting to get away from this very narrow bounded time slots when we all get together at a particular time and then that's it, and then there's another service coming along in a week's time. Actually, as we reshape those boundaries, as we provide more ways for people to contribute, some of those will be live, and we'll find those challenging because, we don't normally expect people to jump up in the middle of a service and shout out their comments, "You're wrong," or maybe in your church they do.
Often.
But so I've heard. But there are so many exciting creative outlets for people, and so to come back to your question directly, one of the things which has become really evident to me in my churches, we're mostly an older profile. Actually, there are plenty of people who helped one another into online engagement, but part of their discovery is they can now hear everything that's said, and that's no small thing. So actually, sometimes some of the reasons and motivations for people to engage with online content, not necessarily as a replacement for an alternative to the gathering together, is simply the experience can be better, and recognizing that we have this brilliant inclusion opportunity. And I know it's challenging. As soon as if you start that process that I described of working out those who's, so who are all the different people and groups we're trying to reach out to, it's infinite if we're not careful. We have to make choices, but we don't have to narrow ourselves in the usual way, because we don't have to say we have the service happening at a particular point in time. How can we prepare for one service or one theme or one topic that might be engaging different people in different ways, either on that day or through the week? So many good opportunities, and we're just scratching the surface here. We're going to discover great things together, I think.
Absolutely. And I think, I've often been thinking over this last year as we've been talking about, people who aren't online or are missing out, we're excluding them from church or whatever, even if we're running a phone line. Actually, sadly, we've always excluded people from church and from worship by the choice of the day or the time or the length or the type of music or the seats or whatever. We have always excluded people from church. Actually, what we need to do is accept this as an opportunity to actually not exclude, but make choices and see in what ways we can reach more groups of people with that story of God and with that worship. And I think there's a huge opportunity there for us all as churches to look at doing that, and that collaboration between congregations as well. Wouldn't it be lovely if some congregations maybe focused on some of those groups and another on other of those groups, so that we can try and have as many as we can. We don't have horse and cart anymore. It doesn't take us long to drive 9 miles to the church that actually we feel quite in communion with. We can do that relatively easily in the majority. And I know there's at least one person here who doesn't drive on the chat, and I'm waiting for the comment. But you know, we are more mobile as a world and as a society now than we have ever been. And I think there are opportunities in person and online to look at that. One question I just want to come to, or one point, David Williams mentioned earlier that there's some interesting research being done by the US Episcopal Church at the journey from attracting people who are similar to congregation members, advertising to them, and then their journey into church. And I think that will be interesting when we come to further weeks down the line about how we put things together, how we use social media. And so, David, if you can send us the link to that, that would be fabulous as well, that you're able to look at that. And I think sorry, Jeremy, on you go.
Yeah, I was just going to make one comment, which is those people we are attracting in, those people who are kind of flying by through online events and so on, and gradually being drawn in. A challenge and an exciting opportunity, I guess, is that their expectations of what church is are different than the people who've been there for a while. So actually, if we're not conscious of that, then those people who drifted in will drift out again. But if we harness the energy of that, I think people we connect with online first, or people who've been drawn more regularly into the life of the church through online means, are going to be that much more receptive to the idea that they will contribute. They will be an active part of the church. So I think that's exciting too.
Yeah. I feel that as we finish, we're going to finish just in a few minutes, but I feel that we need to award a prize each week for the chat comment of the episode. And we all know what's
I
about.
think I know which one.
I think I know too.
Have you worked it out? Terry wins the prize. I will personally send her a prize for this one. Over the last few webinars I've attended, I've learned that I need to get a husband, so there's someone to hold the camera when I want to film somewhere outside the sitting room, and children so they can monitor the live stream. I feel this is maybe a slow-moving strategy. But as a runner-up, Mike Goss, who just suggests instead of a husband, she could always get a tripod. There is no doubt that there are challenges in all this about who does what, but we are delighted that you've joined us today and that you've watched. Please share this video with other people as well that might be there. Our next session, is on worship and on mission. The recording of this one will be on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, just whenever we get that sorted as well. We do have 6 sessions, of which this is the first. And I'm hoping the look of Jeremy's eyes shifting about as he's looking for the thing. Oh, there we go. It did go up. So the 13th of May is our next session on worship and mission. Then the 20th of May on the tech end to end, and then the last 3 into June. So we really do hope that you are able to join us on Facebook, on YouTube, or on our website. Please do go to our website and sign up, because we will be sending out some useful information with some of the links that we've referred to in today's session. We'll put them on our Facebook page as well. But Church Tech Chat, that's not easy, .org for sign up and to receive our emails. We are really keen that you can interact with us, and we really do hope that you'll keep this conversation going. Please do remember that if you can't make one of them, they will be online afterwards as well, but obviously we can't interact with you. It's like Ant and Dec when they say if you're watching or on demand, don't vote for what celebrity you want out the jungle. But do join us live, do interact with us, do share with us, and do keep joining in that conversation. It's not just about the cables. It's not just about the cameras and the plugs. It's about why we do it, and it's about furthering the mission of God within our communities. So with those comments, we'll say good afternoon. We hope that we haven't kept you too long from your lunch or what else you've got to do. Wherever you are in the UK right now, it's the 6th of May. Vote. We don't care how you vote. Vote. Just get out there and vote if it is still that day. If it's
Unless
after
you're watching
that,
the recording, in which case
well, exactly. If it's after the recording, don't worry. The way things have gone, there'll be another vote along for an election in about 3 months' time. I'm fairly certain. But no, please do join us next Thursday for our next session on worship and mission. We hope you have a good day, a good week, and we'll see you all again. Take care, everyone. God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.